Some years ago, my wife was in poor health, and our family doctor, in whose skill and honesty I had implicit confidence, advised a change of climate. I shared, from an unprofessional standpoint, his opinion that the raw winds, the chill rains, and the violent changes of temperature that characterized the winters in the region of the Great Lakes tended to aggravate my wife's difficulty and would undoubtedly shorten her life if she remained exposed to them. The doctor's advice was that we seek not a temporary place of sojourn, but a permanent residence in a warmer and more equable climate. I was engaged at the time in grape culture in northern Ohio, and, as I liked the business and had given it much study, I decided to look for some other locality suitable for carrying it on. I thought of sunny France, of sleepy Spain, of southern California, but there were objections to them all. It occurred to me that I might find what I wanted in some one of our own southern states. It was a sufficient time after the war for conditions in the South to have become somewhat settled, and I was enough of a pioneer to start a new industry if I could not find a place where grape culture had been tried. I wrote to a cousin who had gone into the turpentine business in central North Carolina. He assured me, in response to my inquiries, that no better place could be found in the South than the state and neighborhood where he lived. The climate was perfect for health, and, in conjunction with the soil, ideal for grape culture. Labor was cheap, and land could be bought for a mere song. He gave us a cordial invitation to come and visit him while we looked into the matter. We accepted the invitation, and after several days of leisurely travel, the last 100 miles of which were up a river on a side-wheel steamer, we reached our destination, a quaint old town which I shall call Pattsville because, for one reason, that is not its name. There was a red brick market house in the public square, with a tall tower which held a four-faced clock that struck the hours, and from which there pealed out a curfew at 9 o'clock. There were 2 or 3 hotels, a courthouse, a jail, stores, offices, and all the appurtenances of a county seat and a commercial emporium. For while Patesville numbered only 4,000 or 5,000 inhabitants, of all shades of complexion, it was one of the principal towns in North Carolina, and had a considerable trade in cotton and naval stores. This business activity was not immediately apparent to my unaccustomed eyes. Indeed, when I first saw the town, there brooded over it a calm that seemed almost sabbatic in its restfulness, though I learned later on that underneath its somnolent exterior the deeper currents of life, love and hatred, joy and despair, ambition and avarice, faith and friendship, flowed not less steadily than in livelier latitudes. We found the weather delightful at that season, the end of summer, and were hospitably entertained. Our host was a man of means and evidently regarded our visit as a pleasure, and we were therefore correspondingly at our ease and in a position to act with the coolness of judgment desirable in making so radical a change in our lives. My cousin placed a horse and buggy at our disposal, and himself acted as our guide until I became somewhat familiar with the country. I found that grape culture, while it had never been carried on to any great extent, was not entirely unknown in the neighborhood. Several planters thereabouts had attempted it on a commercial scale in former years, with greater or less success. But like most southern industries, it had felt the blight of war and had fallen into desuetude. I went several times to look at a place that I thought might suit me. It was a plantation of considerable extent that had formerly belonged to a wealthy man by the name of McAdoo. The estate had been for years involved in litigation between disputing heirs, during which period shiftless cultivation had well nigh exhausted the soil. There had been a vineyard of some extent on the place, but it had not been attended to since the war, and had lapsed into utter neglect. The vines, here partly supported by decayed and broken-down trellises, there twining themselves among the branches of the slender saplings which had sprung up among them, grew in wild and unpruned luxuriance, and the few scattered grapes they bore were the undisputed prey of the first comer. The site was admirably adapted to grape raising. The soil, with a little attention, could not have been better, and with the native grape, the luscious Scoopernong, as my main reliance in the beginning, I felt sure that I could introduce and cultivate successfully a number of other varieties. One day I went over with my wife to show her the place. We drove out of the town over a long wooden bridge that spanned a spreading mill pond, past the long whitewashed fence surrounding the county fairground, and struck into a road so sandy that the horses' feet sank to the fetlocks. Our route lay partly uphill and partly down, for we were in the Sandhill County. We drove past cultivated farms, and then by abandoned fields grown up in scrub oak and short-leaved pine, and once or twice through the solemn aisles of the virgin forest, where the tall pines, well-nigh meeting over the narrow road, shut out the sun and wrapped us in cloistral solitude. Once, at a crossroads, I was in doubt as to the turn to take, and we sat there waiting 10 minutes. We had already caught some of the native infection of restfulness, for some human being to come along who could direct us on our way. At length a little Negro girl appeared, walking straight as an arrow, with a piggin full of water on her head. After a little patient investigation, necessary to overcome the child's shyness, we learned what we wished to know, and at the end of about 5 miles from the town, reached our destination. We drove between a pair of decayed gate posts, the gate itself had long since disappeared, and up a straight sandy lane, between 2 lines of rotting rail fence, partly concealed by jimson weeds and briars, to the open space where a dwelling house had once stood, evidently a spacious mansion, if we might judge from the ruined chimneys that were still standing, and the brick pillars on which the sills rested. The house itself, we had been informed, had fallen a victim to the fortunes of war. We alighted from the buggy, walked about the yard for a while, and then wandered off into the adjoining vineyard. Upon Annie's complaining of weariness, I led the way back to the yard, where a pine log, lying under a spreading elm, afforded a shady though somewhat hard seat. One end of the log was already occupied by a venerable-looking colored man. He held on his knees a hat full of grapes, over which he was smacking his lips with great gusto, and a pile of grapeskins near him indicated that the performance was no new thing. We approached him at an angle from the rear, and were close to him before he perceived us. He respectfully rose as we drew near and was moving away, when I begged him to keep his seat. "Don't let us disturb you," I said. "There is plenty of room for us all." He resumed his seat with somewhat of embarrassment. While he had been standing, I had observed that he was a tall man, and though slightly bowed by the weight of years, apparently quite vigorous. He was not entirely black, and this fact, together with the quality of his hair, which was about 6 inches long and very bushy, except on the top of his head, where he was quite bald, suggested a slight strain of other than Negro blood. There was a shrewdness in his eyes, too, which was not altogether African, and which, as we afterwards learned from experience, was indicative of a corresponding shrewdness in his character. He went on eating the grapes, but did not seem to enjoy himself quite so well as he had apparently done before he became aware of our presence. "Do you live around here?" I asked, anxious to put him at his ease. "Yas, sir. I lives des ober yander, behind de next sand hill, on de Lumberton plank road." "Do you know anything about the time when this vineyard was cultivated?" "Lord bless you, sir, I knows all about it. Dey ain't nigher a man in dis settlement what won't tell you old Julius McAdoo us born and raised on dis yer same plantation. Is you de northern gemmen what's gwine ter buy de old vineyard?" "I am looking at it," I replied, "but I don't know that I shall care to buy unless I can be reasonably sure of making something out of it." "Well, sir, you is a stranger to me, and I is a stranger to you, and we is both strangers to one another. But if I was in you place, I wouldn't buy dis vineyard." Why not? I asked. Well, I don't know where you believes in Kunjin or not. Some of the white folks don't, or says they don't. But the truth of the matter is that this your old vineyard is goophered. Is what? I asked, not grasping the meaning of this unfamiliar word. Is goophered, conjured, bewitch. He imparted this information with such solemn earnestness and with such an air of confidential mystery that I felt somewhat interested, while Annie was evidently much impressed and drew closer to me. How do you know it is bewitched? I asked. I wouldn't expect for you to believe me less you know all about the facts. But if you and young mister don't mean listening to a old nigger run on a minute two while you were resting, I can explain to you how it all happened. We assured him that we would be glad to hear how it all happened, and he began to tell us. At first, the current of his memory, or imagination, seemed somewhat sluggish, but as his embarrassment wore off, his language flowed more freely, and the story acquired perspective and coherence. As he became more and more absorbed in the narrative, his eyes assumed a dreamy expression, and he seemed to lose sight of his auditors, and to be living over again in monologue his life on the old plantation. Old Mars Dougal McAdoo, he began, bought this place long many years before the war, and I remember well when he sought out all this your part, the plantation in Scuppernons. The vimes growed monsters fast, and Mars Dougal made 1,000 gallon Scuppernon wine every year. Now, if days anything a nigger lub, next to possum and chicken and watermillions, it's Scuppernons. They ain't nothing that can stand up siding the Scuppernon for sweetness. Sugar ain't a circumstance to Scuppernon. When the season is nigh about over, and the grapes begin to swivel up, there's a little way the wrinkles are old age. When the skin gets soft and brown, then the Scuppernon make you smack yo lip and roll yo eye and whoosh for mo. So I reckon it ain't very 'stonishing that niggers love Scuppernon. There was a sight of niggers in the neighborhood of the vineyard. There was only Mars Henry Brayboy's niggers, and old Mars James McLean's niggers, and Mars Dougal's own niggers. Then they was a settlement of free niggers and po buckras down by the Wimbledon Road. And Mars Dougal had the only vineyard in the neighborhood. I reckon it ain't so much so nowadays, but before the way, in slavery times, a nigger didn't mind going for 10 mile in a night, when they was something good to eat at the Eutherine. So arter a while Mars Dougal begin to miss his Scuppernons. Cozy he accused the niggers er it, but they all nied it to the last. Mars Dougal sought spring guns and steel traps, and he and the overseer sought up nights once or twice it, till one night Mars Dougal, he was a monstrous careless man, got his leg shot fuller cowpeas. But somehow er nuther they couldn't never catch, none of the niggers. I dunner how it happened, but it happened des, like I tell you, and the grapes kept on a-goin' des the same. But bimeby old Mars Dougal fix up a plan to stop it. They was a kunju omen living down mongs the free niggers on the Wimbledon Road, and all the darkies from Rockfish to Beaver Crick was feared of her. She could walk day moss powerful as kin goofer, could make people have fits, rheumatize, make 'em just dwindle away and die. And they say she went out riding the niggers at night, for she was a witch sides being a kunju oman. Mars Dougal hearn about on Peggy's doings, and begun to reflect where no, he couldn't get her to heap, him keep the niggers offen the grapevines. One day in the spring the year, old Miss pack up a basket chicken in pound cake and a bottle Scuppernong wine, and Mars Dougal took it in his buggy and drive over to Aunt Peggy's cabin. He took the basket in and had a long talk with Aunt Peggy. The next day Aunt Peggy come up to the vineyard. The niggers seed her slippin' round, and they soon found out what she was doing there. Mars Dougal had heed her to Goophered Grapevines. She santered round mongst the vimes, and took a leaf from this one, and a grape hull from that one, and a grape seed from another one, and then a little twig from here, and a little pinch of dirt from there, and put it all in a big black bottle, with a snake's tooth and a speckle's hen's gall in, some hairs from a black cat's tail, and then filled the bottle with scuppernong wine. When she got the goofer all ready and fix, she tuck and went out in the woods and buried it under the root of a red oak tree, and then come back and tolly one the nigger she done goofer the grapevines, and a nigger what eat them grapes, be sure to die inside in 12 months. After that the niggers let the scuppernongs alone, and Mars Dougal didn't have no cation to find no mo fault, and the season was most gone, when a strange gammon stopped at the plantation one night to see Mars Dougal on some business. And his coachman, seeing the scuppernongs growing so nice and sweet, slip around behind the smokehouse, and at all the scuppernongs he could hold. Nobody didn't notice it at the time, but that night, on the way home, the gamon's horse runned away and killed the coachman. When we heard the news on Lucy the cook, she up and say she see the strange nigger eating the scuppernongs behind the smokehouse, and then we know the goofer had been wookin'. Then one the nigger chillins runned away from the quarters one day, and got in the scuppernongs, and deed the next week. White folks say he the fevu, but the niggers knowed it was the goofer. So you can be sure the darkies didn't have much to do with them scuppernong vimes. When the scuppernong season was over for that year, Mars Dougal found he had made 1,500 gallon of wine. And one of the niggers heard him laughing with the overseer fit to kill, in saying them 1,500 gallon or wine was monstrous good and trues on the $10 he laid out on the vineyard. So I low as he paid on Peggy $10 for to goofer the grapevines. The goofer didn't wook no mo till the next summer, when along towards the middle the season one of the field hands died. And ease that left Mars Dougal shoulder hands, he went off to town for to buy another. He fotched a new nigger home with him. He was only nigger, the color a gingy cake, in ball is a hoss apple on the top his head. He was a pert old nigger, though, and could do a big day's work. Now it happened that one of the niggers on the next plantation, one of old Mars Henry Brayboy's niggers, had runned away the day before and took to the swamp, and old Mars Dougal and some of the other neighbor with folks had gone out with their guns, and their dogs fur to heap 'em hunt for the nigger. And the hains on our own plantation was all so flusterated that we forgot to tell the new hand about the goofer on the scuppernong veems. 'Cause he smelled the grapes and see the veems, and atter doc the foos thing he done was to slip off to the grapevines, dout sayin' nothing to nobody. Next morning he told some of the niggers 'bout to find bait or scuppernong he had the night before. When they told him 'bout the goofer on the grapevines, he was that terrified that he turned pale and looked as like he gwine to die right in his tracks. The overseer come up and asked what who's the matter, and when they told him Henry been eating of the scuppernongs and got the goofer on him, he gin Henry a big drink of whiskey, and lo that the next rainy day he take him over to round Peggy's, and see if she wouldn't take the goofer offen him, seeing as he didn't know nothing about it, till he done at the grapes. Sure enough, it rained the next day, and the overseer went over to round Peggy's with Henry, and Aunt Peggy say that being as Henry didn't know about the goofer, and at the grapes in ignorance the consequences, she reckoned she mought be able for to take the goofer offen him. So she fotch out her bottle with some cunju medicine in it, and poured some out in a gourd for Henry to drink. He managed to get it down. He say it tasted like whiskey with something bitter in it. She lowed dat would keep de goofer offen him till de spring, but when de sap begin to rise in de grapevines, he had to come and see her again, and she tell him what he's to do. Next spring, when the sap commenced to rise in the scuppernun vine, Henry took a ham one night. What he get the ham? I don't know. They want no hams on the plantation seppin what has in the smokehouse, but I never see Henry about the smokehouse. But as I was a-sayin', he took the ham over to Aunt Peggy's, and Aunt Peggy told him that when Mars Dougal begin to prune the grapevines, he must go and take and scrape off the sap where it ooze out in the cuttings of the vines, and in it his bald head with it. And if he do that once a year, the goofer wouldn't work agin him long as he done it. And being as he fotch her the ham, she fix it so he can eat all the scupper, none he want. So Henry and in his head with the sap out in the big grapevine des halfway twixt the quarters in the big house, and the goofer never wook agin him that summer. But the beatin'est thing you ever see happened to Henry. Up to that time he was as bald as a sweetened tater, but des as soon as the young leaves begun to come out on the grapevines, the hair begun to grow out on Henry's head, and by the middle of the summer he had the biggest head of hair on the plantation. Before that, Henry had tolerable good hair round the ages, but soon as the young grapes begun to come, Henry's had begun to quirl all up in little balls, dis like dis your regular grapey hair, and by the time the grapes got ripe, his head looked des like a bunch of grapes. Combined, it didn't do no good. He wook at it half the night with her Jim Crow, and think he get it straightened out, but in the morning the grapes would be there des the same. So he gin it up, and tried to keep the grapes down by having his hair cut short. 1. A small card resembling a currycomb in construction and used by Negroes in the rural districts instead of a comb. But that wain't the queerest thing about the goofer. When Henry come to the plantation, he was getting a little old and stiff in the jeans. But that summer he got des as spry and lively as any young nigger on the plantation. Fake, he got so biggity that Mars Jackson, the overseer, had to threaten to whip him, if he didn't stop cutting up his didos and behave hissif. But the most curouses thing happened in the fall, when the sap begin to go down in the grapevines. Thus, when the grapes as gathered, the knots begun to straighten out in Henry's hair. And when the leaves begin to fall, Henry's hair mence to drap out. And when the vines as bar, Henry's head was baller and it was in the spring, and he begin to get oly and stiff in the joints again, and paid no mo' attention to the gals joiner the whole winter. In next spring, when he rubbed the sap on again, he got young again, and so supple and lively that none of the young niggers on the plantation couldn't jump, ne'er dance, ne'er hoe as much cotton as Henry. But in the fall of the year his grapes mence to straighten out, and his joints to get stiff, and his hair drap off, and the rheumatize begin to wrestle with him. Now, if you'd a knowed old Mars Dougal McAdoo, you'd a knowed that it had to be a mighty rainy day when he couldn't find somepin' for his niggers to do, and it had to be a mighty little hole he couldn't crawl through, and had to be a monstrous cloudy night when $1 get by him in the darkness. And when he see how Henry get young in the spring and old in the fall, he allowed ter hissif as how he could make mo' money out in Henry than by wooking him in the cotton field. Long the next spring, after the sap mency to rise, and Henry in it his head, instated fer to get young and supple, Mars Dougal up and took Henry to town, and sold him for $1,500. Coz the man what bought Henry didn't know nothing about the goofer, and Mars Dougal didn't see no occasion fer to tell him. Long toots the fall, when the sap went down, Henry begin to get all again same as usual, and his new master begin to get scared lessen he gwine to lose his $1,500 nigger. He sent fear a mighty fine doctor, But the medicine didn't appear to do no good. The goofer had a good holt. Henry told the doctor about the goofer, but the doctor they laugh at him. One day in the winter, Mars Dougal went to town, in whose Santorin long the main street, when who should he meet but Henry's new master? They said howdy, and Mars Dougal asked him to have a cigar, and after they run on a while about the craps in the weather, Mars Dougal asked him, sorter careless, like as if he'd as thought of it, how you like the nigger I sold you last spring? Henry's master shook his head and knocked the ashes off in his cigar. Spec I made a bad baggin when I bought that nigger. Henry done good work all the summer, but since the fall set in, he 'pears to be sorter pinin' away. They ain't nothing particular the matter with him. Leastways, the doctor say so. Kept see tecker de rheumatiz, but his hair is all fell out, and ef he don't pick up his strength mighty soon, I spec I'm gwine to lose him. They smoked on a while, and Bimby old Mars say, well, a baggin's a baggin, but you and me is good friends, and I don't want to see you lose all the money you paid for that nigger. And if what you say is so, and I ain't sputting it, he ain't worth much now. I specs you walked him too, had this summer, ease the swamps down here don't agree with the Sandhill nigger. So you just let me know, and if he gets any wusser, I'll be willing to give you $500 for him, and take my chances on his living. Sure enough, when Henry begun to draw up with the rheumatiz, and it looked like he gwine to die for show, his new master send for Mars Dougal, and Mars Dougal gin him what he promised, and brung Henry home again. He took good care of him during the winter, give him whiskey to rub his rheumatiz, and tobacco to smoke, and all he want to eat. K's a nigger what he could make $1,000 a year off, and didn't grow on evie huckleberry bush. Next spring, when the sap rees in Henry's ha commenced to sprout, Mars Dougal sold him again, down in Robeson County this time, and he kept that sellin' business up for 5 year or mo. Henry never say nothing about the goofer ter his new masters, case he know he gwine to be took good care of the next winter, when Mars Dougal buy him back. And Mars Dougal made enough money offen Henry to buy another plantation over on Beaver Creek, but long 'bout the een, that 5 year they come a stranger to stop at the plantation. The first day he used there he went out with Mars Dougal, and spent all the morning looking over the vineyard, and after dinner they spent all the evening playing cards. The nigger soon skivered that he was a Yankee, and that he come down to North, Selina for to learn the wheat folks how to raise grapes and make wine. He promised Mars Dougal he could make the grapevines bar twice it as many grapes, and that the new wine press he was a-sellin' would make more than twice it as many gallons of wine. And only Mars Dougal dis drunk it all in, despaired to be bewitched with that Yankee. When the darkies see that Yankee running around the vineyard and digging under the grapevines, they shook their heads, and lo that they feared Mars Dougal losing his men. Mars Dougal had all the dirt dug away from under the roots, all the scuppernong vines, and let 'em stand that away for a week mo. Then that Yankee made the niggers fix up a mixtry lime and ashes, and manure, and pour it round the roots the grapevines. Then he wies Mars Dougal for to trim the vines closet, and Mars Dougal took and done everything the Yankee told him to do. During all of this time, mind you, this your Yankee was living off in the fat of the lane, at the big house, in playing kids with Mars Dougal every night. And they say Mars Dougal lost mo'n $1,000 during the week that Yankee was a-ruining the grapevines. When the sap rist next spring, Ola Henry knitted his head as usual, and his hair mensa to grow as the same as it done every year. The scuppernong veems growed monsts fast, and the leaves was greener and thicker than they ever been during my remembrance. And Henry's hair growed out thicker than eber, and he pared to get younger and younger, and soupler. And seeing as he was shooter bands that spring, having took in considerable new ground, Mars Dougal eluded he wouldn't sell Henry till he get the crappin' in the cotton chop. So he kept Henry on the plantation, but long about time for the grapes to come on the scuppin' on vimes, they 'peared to come a change over 'em. The leaves withered and swivel up, and the young grapes turn yaller, and bimeby everybody on the plantation could see that the whole vineyard was dyin'. Mars Dougal took and watered the vimes and done all he could, but it wain't no use. That Yankee had done bust the watermillion. One time the vimes picked up a bit. In Mars Dougal lowed they was gwine to come out again. But that Yankee done dug too close under the roots, and pruned the branches too close to the vime, and all that lime and ashes done burned the life out in the vimes, and they just kept a within and a swivelin'. All this time the goofer was a-wookin'. When the vime started to wither, Henry immense to complain his rheumatize, and when the leaves begin to dry up, his hair mence to drap out. When the vimes fresh up a bit, Henry'd get pert again, and when the vimes wither again, Henry'd get old again, and des kept getting mo and mo, fittin' for nothing. He des pined away, and finally tucked ter his cabin. And when the big vime war he got the sap ter, and his head withered and turned yaller and died, Henry died too. Des went out sorter like a cannel. They didn't appear to be nuffin the matter wid him, keepin' de rheumatiz, but his strength des dwindled away till he didn't have enough left to draw his breath. The goofer had got the underholt, and throwed Henry that time for good in all. Mars Dougal took on mightily bout losing his vimes and his nigger in the same year, and he swore that if he could get holt er that Yankee, he'd wear him ter a frazzle, and den chaw up the frazzle. And he done it too for Mars Dougal, as a monstrous brash man when he once get started. He sought the vineyard out ober again, but it was 3 or 4 year before the vimes got ter bearing any scuppernons. When the war broke out, Mars Dougal raised a company and went off to fight the Yankees. He say he was mighty glad that war come, and he does want to kill a Yankee for every dollar he lost longer dat grape-raisin' Yankee, and I spec he would 'a' done it too if the Yankees hadn't sufficient sumpin', and killed him fuss. After the surrender, Ole Miss moved to town. The niggers all scattered way from the plantation, and the vineyard ain't been cultivated since. Is that story true? Asked Annie doubtfully, but seriously as the old man concluded his narrative. It's des as true as I'm a settin' here, miss. Dey's a easy way to prove it. I can lead the way right to Henry's grave over yonder in the plantation buryin' ground. And I tell yer what, master, I would advise you to buy this your old vineyard. Case the goofers on it yit, and they ain't no tellin' when it's gwine to crap out. But I thought you said all the old vines died. They did pair ter die, but a few on 'em come out agin, and is mixed in 'mongs de others. I ain't skeered to eat de grapes, case I knows de old vimes from de new ones. But with strangers, dey ain't no tellin' what mought happen. I would advise yer to buy dis vineyard. I bought the vineyard, nevertheless, and it has been for a long time in a thriving condition, and is often referred to by the local press as a striking illustration of the opportunities open to northern capital in the development of southern industries. The luscious scuppernong holds first rank among our grapes, though we cultivate a great many other varieties, and our income from grapes packed and shipped to the northern markets is quite considerable. I have not noticed any developments of the gopher in the vineyard, although I have a mild suspicion that our colored assistants do not suffer from want of grapes during the season. I found, when I bought the vineyard, that Uncle Julius had occupied a cabin on the place for many years and derived a respectable revenue from the product of the neglected grapevines. This, doubtless, accounted for his advice to me not to buy the vineyard, though whether it inspired the gopher story I am unable to state. I believe, however, that the wages I paid him for his services as coachman, for I gave him employment in that capacity, were more than an equivalent for anything he lost by the sale of the vineyard.